Greetings! Thank you for lending an ear to the Voice of the Times for Friday, July 1, 2022. For today's editorial, flooding remains a scourge for the poor. If you are poor, you are highly vulnerable to the terrible consequences of severe flooding. That is the essence of a study published recently by scientists from the World Bank. The correlation between flooding risk and poverty might be old hat to many environmentalists, but the research done by June Renscher and his colleagues at the World Bank offers the first global estimates on the losses it has inflicted. The study also suggests that the risk of flooding is substantially higher than previously thought. About 90% of the people vulnerable to flooding live in poor or middle-income countries, the study found. The same regions make up 12% of the global GDP, or roughly $98.8 trillion. By accounting for the poverty levels of exposed populations, we show that low-income countries are disproportionately exposed to flood risk, while being more vulnerable to disastrous long-term impacts, the researchers note. According to one estimate, flooding was responsible for more than $82 billion in losses globally last year, nearly a third of all losses from natural catastrophes. The Philippines knows all too well the nightmare heavy flooding brings. About 20 typhoons blow into the country every year, and one or two leave a wide swath of death and destruction. Superstorms like Ondoy and Yolanda readily come to mind, but they will not be the last. They in fact give a foretaste of the kind of extreme weather that will become the norm if no action is done now. The government has not been remiss in preparing for the next big flood. In 2012, following the devastation from Ondoy, the National Economic and Development Authority approved a flood management master plan for Metro Manila. But NEDA itself acknowledged that flooding remains a perennial problem and many cities continue to suffer from severe inundation. Other mitigation measures, such as shoring up coastlines against storm surges and clearing outdated sewage systems that obstruct the ebb of floodwaters, have met with little success. The World Bank has been helping the Philippines build up its resilience against natural disasters by developing a disaster risk finance strategy, arranging contingent financing, providing technical assistance, and intermediating market-based transactions. But even that may not be enough. A weather expert from the National Oceanography Center in the United Kingdom sees the problem this way. Most countries assume that the likelihood of surge extremes will remain the same and only account for sea level rise. This may cause governments to underestimate future flooding. Factor in uncontrolled urbanization and rampant illegal logging, and the risk is magnified several times over. Economically challenged countries like the Philippines will have their fate sealed unless we excise the root of the problem: climate change. Climate summits have come and gone, but global warming is still the elephant in the room. After each conference, the world's economic giants, some of whom are also the biggest contributors to air pollution, grandly proclaimed that they had arrived at a consensus on preventing the further rise in the Earth's temperature and setting targets to reduce the use of fossil fuels. But after a few weeks, the euphoria dissipates and global fuel production rises to even higher levels. The cycle continues. Meanwhile, the threat of climate change looms, even larger for countries that are at the mercy of warming oceans that spawn more vicious storms and rising sea levels. Incoming National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos is absolutely right. Climate change, not the maritime dispute with China or the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is the biggest threat the Philippines is facing. The promises of decarbonization by 2030 or 2050 have been dumped by the wayside, Carlos says. She echoes the sentiments of former President Rodrigo Duterte, who reproached the wealthier countries for failing to cut their carbon emissions. Carlos has set the tone to confront climate change head-on. It's now up to Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to give it the necessary impetus. The country's survival depends on it. And that's the editorial for Friday, July 1, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.
Our longest trusted English newspaper since 1898. Now available digitally. Computer. Order the Manila Times Digital Edition. Subscribed. Get the Manila Times Digital Edition for less than 2 pesos and 50 centavos per day when you sign up for 1 year. The Manila Times, news source of choice, trusted since 1898.